Eric, can you just set the stage and tell us about the background? How did you started in academia, you have a PhD in mathematics, so how did you become a risk officer and how did you get into Deutsche Bank?
I started before the financial crisis when credit derivatives was really growing still exponentially in 2006. And please interrupt me if you can't hear me well, okay?
No,
can you hear me well? Okay, excellent. So I worked for Citi and Goldman in structuring and modeling roles, primarily within credit derivatives. There was then the job at Deutsche Bank, which was more quasi-academic, I would say. It was in the quantitative risk research and development group, which is a small group within the risk management department at Deutsche Bank. We oversaw all of the trading book, so everything that had market risk in it. My role was to look into the more complex risks that the bank faced. So that, in a nutshell, is what my role was. This was in 2010.
Okay, and how did you get from looking at risk at the end of table?
Okay, so my first project was to assess the risk in the credit correlation book, which consisted of credit derivatives, some of them more complex than others. Gradually, I started asking questions, and within a few months, I realized that things were not okay within this particular book. So at first, I thought it was just the stress tests that were incorrect, and those were, as far as I could tell, less important. But gradually I realized that it wasn't just the stress test, it was the actual valuation. So maybe this would be a good place to just to show you the actual numbers that we're talking about. So if you could see my screen here, there was at its peak, the credit correlation portfolio consisted of about $130 billion of so-called leveraged super senior tranches, and the most important thing here is this number here. So that book was inflated at the height of the crisis by over $12 billion. In my estimate. By the time I was looking at it in 2010, 2011, the number was several $100 million. But you can see that this number was very significant for a bank such as Deutsche Bank, which was the largest bank at the time in the world. Its Tier 1 capital was $43 billion. So admitting those losses would have probably brought it to the point of needing a rescue. Which today, unfortunately, it seems that it might be back close to that point again.
Yeah, so to be sure, so we're talking about inflated numbers which is about a quarter of the equity of the bank during the financial crisis. So in a way, we're talking about it under Lehman Brothers.
Potentially, and people are comparing it to Lehman Brothers or saying that it's even worse. At the time, Simon Johnson, who was professor at MIT, finance professor at MIT. Before that, he was I believe, the chief economist of the IMF. Wrote pretty extensively that Deutsche Bank was the riskiest financial institution in the world, just because of the contagion effect, etc. So it was probably more systematically important than Lehman, and probably still is. But the fraud that we're looking at, and this was, these inflated numbers were clearly, to me, it was clearly fraud. It wasn't just these numbers. It was true across other asset classes as well. This was probably the largest derivatives book. But it was true in other parts of the trading book as well. Just to give you an idea, Deutsche Bank controlled about 60 or 70% of the leveraged super senior market in the world at the time. So it was far larger than any other bank in that market.
So you suspect that the numbers are dramatically inflated. What happens next? What do you do?
So initially, I was only concerned with stress tests. I only asked people within my department. Once I started realizing that it's a larger issue, I started asking people in other groups. Model validation, these are people who are actually responsible for the models that go into the valuation itself. And I asked people, the risk managers that were dedicated to this particular type of trade. So basically, I started asking people who were closer and closer to the trades themselves and to the valuation. Eventually, I made it all the way to the finance department, which is where the accountants sit, who actually are responsible for the financial reporting. And the last conversation before I went and reported was with the person in the finance department who's actually responsible for valuing these trades, when he told me that these levered super seniors are valued as regular tranches. In other words, the massive short option position that is embedded in these trades was not valued. At that point, I went to the hotline. I went to the SEC and reported. I did not report anonymously, by the way. So that something like this would be very hard to report anonymously. This had to be followed with meetings, with explanations, etc., because it's a fairly complex issue.
We'll get to the SEC soon, but I'd like you to elaborate now on the dynamics inside the bank after you decide to blow the whistle.
So within the bank, initially I met with the head of compliance and regulatory affairs. Called me, invited me for an introductory meeting. As soon as he heard the details, just the first basic description of the securities and the concerns involved, he then said, "I think I know what you're talking about. We already have an investigation into this. We're going to meet with the outside counsel that is investigating this." If you fast forward a few months, when the bank made public statements about these allegations, they said that these were matters that I wasn't responsible for, or that the people who were reporting it this wasn't their area of responsibility, and the allegations are wholly unfounded. So they found there was the phrasing and the framing of the bank's counter arguments were very carefully tailored and clearly were based on this conversation that we had. It enabled them to frame their counterattack.
When you decided to blow the whistle, were you aware of the consequences that there are usually for whistleblowers? You were aware of the dynamics that's going to unfold?
I had a vague notion that bad things could happen. First of all, I didn't know any whistleblowers, so I didn't really know the details, and I wasn't particularly interested in that area before, so I didn't read up on it. So I guess the short answer is no. I certainly wasn't aware of the kind of power and influence of the people that I was dealing with. So I think even if I had known, I probably would have underestimated the type of trouble that I could get into.
And did you take into consideration the possibility of being fired?
Yeah, that I took into account that it's a possibility, especially after the first meeting. At the end of the first meeting, I asked the head of compliance. I asked him, what happens next? Well, when are you gonna tell me what is actually why it's proper what we're doing with the valuation of these trades? And he pretended not to hear me and said, "I don't know what this is going to do to your career." So at that point, it became pretty clear that things are not going too well for me within the bank. But I still felt that this was my responsibility, and this is the right thing to do. So I continued pursuing the matter. So after this initial meeting, he didn't contact me again. I did raise this issue with my superiors, so I escalated up the chain of command. And when I didn't get any answers that were remotely clear or satisfying, I told them that I'm raising my concerns with the SEC. At that point, within an hour of I sent an email to my boss saying, I'm raising these concerns with SEC. Within an hour, I got a phone call from the same lawyer, from the head of compliance, and he said he would arrange meetings in London. He would take me with him to London to meet the various executives who were responsible for the valuation. Eventually, he apparently decided not to take me to London, but instead brought them to New York. So I had a series of meetings with the directors and managing directors from the finance department who were responsible for the valuation. Those meetings were far from satisfactory in terms of explanations, but I did get yelled at quite a bit for, I was told that this issue came from the tip of the bank. I was accused of trying to bring down the bank. So certainly at no point did I feel that the bank was trying to correct anything. It was more they were trying to either intimidate me or to see what I knew. So again, I was asked about my understanding of the modeling involved, what I understood about the trades, and then eventually I was just fired.
Were you aware at that point, or what was the point that you were aware of the new whistleblower program in the Dodd-Frank Act that awards whistleblowers with monetary compensation?
Yes, I was actually more concerned with the whistleblower protection clause. Quite frankly, that the Dodd-Frank award was completely new and untested, and I didn't know. That seemed a little bit more far-fetched at that point, although it certainly existed in my mind. But what was more tested and I felt should have protected me was the anti-retaliation provisions, and those exist not only in Dodd-Frank but also in Sarbanes-Oxley. So they're older. These are older provisions.
So the people at the Deutsche Bank were not pretty excited about your initiative. How were the people at the SEC?
Well, initially I thought they were, they certainly took it very seriously. I met with a number of investigators at the SEC, and their investigation had been ongoing because of the previous whistleblower. So I wasn't aware of the existence of that previous whistleblower until the first meeting with the head of compliance, when he said, "Yeah, I think I know what you're complaining about. We already have an investigation." And then it became clear that there was a whistleblower already. So the SEC investigation had been ongoing, and they seemed to take my complaints quite seriously. I provided them with all the documents I had, with all the information I had, and so my hope was that that this investigation would vindicate me. And eventually, would fast forward a year or so, I received credible information, and by then I'd hired a lawyer who was, a longtime veteran of the SEC, knew people in the SEC. We got wind that the investigation was about to be shut down. By then, I realized the political connections that Deutsche Bank had within the SEC, so I was concerned about what was going on inside the agency. So once there was concern that it was going to be closed down, the next step was to go to the media. So we vetted, we carefully chose the best media outlet that we could find. The considerations were that this is a fairly technical issue, fairly involved. The journalist would have to learn about credit derivatives, about valuation options. So a pretty steep learning curve for a journalist who probably doesn't have a master's in financial engineering. And on top of that, they would have to take my word, their internal documents as well, but they would have to be able to. I wanted the journalists to do more than just provide a he said, she said account. I wanted them to actually go out with an article that basically vindicates me, which is what I wanted from the SEC in the first place. So that vindication would require an outlet, and also have the integrity and be impartial enough so that they could take on a major Wall Street bank.
And
that's a non-trivial statement. I'm sorry?
You have to cross the Atlantic and find such journalists?
Did I have to cross the Atlantic? I'm sorry?
To find such journalists?
Actually not. So I was fortunate enough to find them with the Financial Times. So the Financial Times, I guess, is London-based, but the journalists that I worked with, two of them were in New York and Washington D.C., and one of them was in London. It was Tom Braithwaite and Kara Scannell in the U.S. And Michael McKenzie in London. They proved to be excellent journalists. They took a huge personal risk. I think the newspaper took a risk as well, because it took them several months of work without knowing that this work would eventually pay off with an actual article. They ended up finding not just the other whistleblower, but a third whistleblower. So there were three of us all together. None of us knew of, each one did not know of the others. And they were able to confirm pretty much most of the major points. Certainly every major point that I raised, they were able to confirm. So the article they ended up publishing a few months later was pretty much everything I could hope for. I should say that initially I intended to remain anonymous, or not anonymous, but not have my name published, both because I was concerned about the repercussions for me, and also because I didn't want it to distract from the story. I didn't want the story to be about me. I wanted it to be about the fraud. But I was advised that without my name and without me being public, the story just won't have the same impact. So eventually, I also became public with this.
So what happens the day after the FT runs this story?
So a number of things. Obviously, there was a media frenzy in terms of the responses, because the FT basically said, Deutsche Bank was like Lehman, except they kind of cooked the books. Not in so many words. I'm making it a little bit stronger, but they implied that. And so, there were some bloggers, some people who were on Deutsche Bank's side, and I won't speculate as to why, who tried to throw mud at it. Others confirmed the story. But I think from the investigation point of view, this revived the investigation, and it also allowed me to reach out to other people, which was very important. I was able to use the story to find experts that would help me bring more evidence from outside of Deutsche Bank, evidence as to the valuation of these trades, valuations that Deutsche Bank sent to its counterparties, expert opinions about the ongoings in the market in those days, etc. So really, this was crucial in the success of the investigation ultimately.
So the SEC resumes the investigation, and what would they find?
So in the end, fast forward a few years later, the SEC did accuse them of making the same allegations that I did, but they settled for much less. So effectively lax controls. The Deutsche Bank didn't have to admit anything, and no executive had to pay any sort of price. So no executive was mentioned or had to take any hit, even though in this case clearly this is a case where Deutsche Bank's officers, most senior officers, pay themselves large bonuses based on false financials. They issued shares in the aftermath of the financial crisis that were overvalued, and maybe this is a good place to just remind people of what remind people of what happened to the share price, if I can find it, in those years. Let's see. And sorry. So you can see here the share price, even before the Brexit, when the complaints were raised, and this is after the financial crisis, the share price was around, was between $60-$70. Now it was $13 even before the now famous Department of Justice fine before the Brexit. Part of this is due to the weakness in the European economy, but much of it is also due to these inflated valuations being gradually spread out, or the losses being spread out over subsequent quarters. And in those quarters, Deutsche Bank's executives were able to take very large bonuses, which they never had to pay back.
So you spend a lot of time researching what happened in Deutsche Bank, what happened with whistleblowing and dynamics with the SEC. Do you think that Deutsche Bank is a unique, outstanding case, or with a specific culture that you might want to elaborate on the culture that you think allow this kind of events, or do you think that it has to do with the industry?
So I think the revolving door. There was quite a bit of criminality on Wall Street, not just in Deutsche Bank. I think some banks were worse than others in terms of their culture of compliance. So I'd worked for Goldman before that, and I did not see any violations when I was there. Obviously, I was at a different role, but the impression, my distinct impression, was that there was a much stronger culture of compliance. Risk management was taken more seriously, etc. So I don't think I don't think all the banks are the same. I also think my experience, what I've learned about the revolving door phenomenon within Deutsche Bank, between Deutsche Bank and the SEC, is far worse than anything I've seen with the other banks. So I think other institutions may have had influence over the over enforcement, but nothing like this.
So when was the point in time that you decide that you're not taking the money? You're awarded by you and your partners were awarded $8.5 million from the SEC, from the government, and you decide that you're not going to take your share, which is sort of a crazy decision, I might add.
Yeah. Well, so yeah, I think if you'd asked me 5 years ago, obviously I would have, taken it without blinking, immediately. I think that the decision not to take it brewed over the years. Brewed once, I learned the fine was announced a year ago in 2015, and initially I was upset that no executive was punished. And I was told, just wait, maybe something's going to happen. So I waited, and a month goes by, another month goes by, and nothing happens, and this case just died. So it felt as though I was being given money, I was being given a share. It felt as though the victims were the shareholders here. And when we're talking about accounting fraud, it's like Enron. The executives are the culprits, and the shareholders are the primary victims. So I felt like someone who saw a robbery and calls the cops, and then the cops show up, and it's the guys who just robbed the victim, and they're robbing the victim again. And now they're throwing me a few bucks out of the wallet, and they're basically hush money. If I'd taken that money, I would be party to this injustice on the one hand. I wouldn't be able to speak here in front of you, because you took the money. What are you complaining about now? And it was just I was just furious. So I think the short answer to the question of how could you possibly not take the money, the short answer is, after you've gone through years of watching this injustice go on, you don't want to be part of it.
And so just to be sure, if you gave us $8.5 million, we would have given you an opportunity to talk here today.
Yeah, I should clarify that, much of that money is not would go to the other shareholders, if you will, in that award. So the actual money that I gave up is not $8 million. It's less. It's significantly less.
So in your op-ed that you chose to decline the money, and on the same day or the same weekend actually, you published an op-ed at the Financial Times explaining why you didn't take the money, and specifically you decided to point the finger at the SEC and revolving doors. So we heard a lot about and read a lot about and studied a lot what's happening in the financial crisis in the last 6 or 7 years, and there are many culprits there. And you think that the main culprit, you focus on SEC, and specifically on revolving door. Why is that?
So, yeah, I think, first of all, the SEC is a big organization with lots of people. Most of the people there are fine. I'm focusing specifically on, I focus specifically on 3 top lawyers at the SEC who revolved in and out of the SEC and into Deutsche Bank. And I felt that those lawyers were responsible. At Deutsche Bank, they betrayed the shareholders that they were supposed to protect. I think they fostered a culture a culture that allowed criminality to take place. So I think it's hard to argue. You might argue that the risk taking before the financial crisis, they didn't understand it, etc. That's fine. But what happened after 2008? Some banks came clean. What happened at Deutsche Bank in those years, when I was there, 2010, 2011, was that the legal department there made sure that anybody who raised issues was removed, and that the malfeasance went on. So we know that some of these things continued, including these particular accounting violations went on for years afterwards. I think really the important question is whether the cops are going to be honest or not. And I think that's really what distinguishes this the outcome of this crisis. It's not, the problem to me is not that you have misbehavior on Wall Street. It's that you have misbehavior by the people who are supposed to enforce the law, by the prosecutors, by the regulators. And especially, these are lawyers, so they're expected to be, they should be held to a higher standard. So I think, people talk about, ask why have criminal charges not been filed, and I'm not even suggesting that let's assume that, the bar for a criminal case has not been cleared in this case. We certainly know that the bar for a civil case has been cleared because a civil case has been filed, both in my case and in many other cases. And the question is, why is the civil case filed against the shareholders and not against the executives? Why aren't they hit with a fine? Even if you can't hit them with a fine, just litigating against them could really cost them quite a bit. So just the threat of litigation, or just the action of suing them is in and of itself, and naming them, that would be in and of itself a significant punishment. So I think that's really the upsetting thing, is that the top brass at the SEC decided not to do that, and I think they decided not to do that because they would do that against themselves. And so this is really what the purpose of this of my talk here. What I want you to go to walk away from this lecture with is the understanding that the crime on Wall Street, the misdeeds on Wall Street, are a symptom to me. They're not the disease. The disease is that the judicial system in the U.S., there are far too many conflicts of interest that go not only unpunished but even unaddressed. It's just completely prevalent, and this example is particularly bad.
So I will, before I turn it to the audience to ask you questions, just tell us what happened to your career. So we know that you didn't take the money. We don't understand why, but we know that for a fact. And now we want to hear what happened to your career after you decided to whistleblow.
The Wall Street career was over. I couldn't get a job in another bank. I applied for a number of jobs in various banks. Some of them, I probably would not have considered before that. But the good news is that I did get I did find a position in a fintech company. So, I think many whistleblowers never recover from the loss of their career and from being blackballed in their previous industry. I think I was fortunate partly because my background is more technical, so I was able to make that career change to the technology area.
Who were the external auditors? What did they have to say about this?
The external auditors, it was KPMG. I never met with them though. So during those meetings, it was all internal within Deutsche Bank.
I'm wondering if you have a prescription of how to improve the situation in one of a couple ways or another way. If you think there should be some rule about whether you can take an SEC position if you're coming directly from the industry you're regulating, or a period of time from which you can't go back.
So class action lawyers, I'm not sure. That's not particularly my area, but I think those also tend to hit the shareholders. I'm not sure if that's the solution. I do think that regulations that would prevent the revolving door would be helpful. But I think the part of the problem is that the legal system that is tasked with enforcing these rules is itself conflicted. So really, my feeling is that there needs to be the conflicts of interest within the legal system need to be taken on head on, including, by the way, the judiciary. So judges also have conflicts of interest within the U.S. system, and unfortunately, those have not gotten any better in recent years. So, for those of you who've been following the aftermath of the crisis, there's a judge by the name of Jed Rakoff who tried to reject these types of settlements, and he took a very brave stand against the SEC settlements with the banks, but he was overruled. So I think to resolve this matter, to improve the situation, you need to address the conflicts of interest with both for judges, and we're talking about judges' elections, judges' appointments, etc. But also, maybe also for lawyers, for example, taking the disciplinary function out of the bar association, which is, I think, a little bit too lenient with lawyers' conflicts of interest. So, this is obviously a pretty tall task.
But in class, we've been reading about First Amendment retaliation cases, and it sounds like from the small description of your situation you've given us that, okay, you might exercise my right to free speech, I whistleblew on criminal activity, and I was fired. Can you maybe share some more details around your situation that made it legal for you to be fired? That's what I'm really confused about. How is it legal for you to be fired?
So the answer is it's illegal and it's a crime. And it's actually a very severe, in terms of the impact on me, it was severe. But unfortunately, the legal system generally, in most cases, whistleblowers do get fired, and the people who do the firing get away with it. And if you ask how is that possible, let's go back to the discussion of the conflicts of interest. Unfortunately, the SEC is not the only regulatory body in the U.S. that has been co-opted by the people that it's supposed to regulate. And so that's my short answer.
Hi, my name is Himin, and I'm a PhD student here in accounting, and I'm doing research on whistleblowing. So I have a question for you today. So, as far as I know, unlike stocks, the the SEC's whistleblower program is the first to provide some type of financial rewards to whistleblowers. So for you, in your case, it wasn't that important, but on average, do you think providing financial rewards to whistleblowers are effective in actually preventing fraud and uncovering fraud, something like that?
Yes. So I absolutely believe that it's very important that without the financial incentive, I would not have been able to hire all the people that I did, lawyers, experts, etc. So, I hired all of them based on a percentage of the eventual award. So I do think that this is crucial, but I also feel that without in the end, it's insufficient. So the current Dodd-Frank is very nice, but as long as you don't have a regulator that is intent on enforcing it honestly, it's going to be the outcome is going to be that you're going to have settlements that reward whistleblowers and their lawyers, but don't actually don't properly address the financial crimes. So I think that's what we're seeing in recent years. We're seeing quite a few fines in the U.S. against the banks, but not against the executives. And I don't think that this is deterring. I think that we're just waiting for the next crime wave to hit us if it's not already there. Because I don't see how this is deterring anybody from committing these violations.
First off, I wanted to thank you for your courage and integrity. I'm an SEC whistleblower. I completely blew up my career last year. I was a principal in a firm, billion-dollar RA firm, and it's still going on. The SEC investigation. It's been the hardest 18 months of my life, and I'm sure it was really difficult. I'm sure you lost a lot of sleepless, sleepless nights. When did you decide? When was the moment for you when you said, "No, this isn't right. I'm not going to let this happen. I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure this, comes to light"?
First of all, thank you for your courage, and I can tell that it hasn't been easy for you. I think. There are a number of kind of points where you're really, really frightened. You have to make a big decision. So I would say there was the point when before going to the hotline internally at Deutsche Bank and going to the SEC, I still remember, sitting in front of my computer and filling out the SEC form and kind of being really scared about, pressing that send button in the end, and before the first meeting with the SEC investigators, before going to the press, it was really frightening. Before the story broke out at the Financial Times, I did not know what the outcome would be. For months, when I was at Deutsche Bank, I increased the security on my computer. I lived in New York at the time, and every time I crossed the street, I would look both ways. I didn't know what would happen to me. I had to make sure that all the information that I had within Deutsche Bank was backed up, both with my lawyers, I kept it with a friend, some of it, so there was always that concern. There was the concern when I was still at Deutsche Bank. I never knew, is my path going to work this time when I try to get into the building. I think that in the U.S. in particular, but throughout the developed world today, corruption is probably the number one problem. That's kind of the biggest fight that we have is against the influence of money in our government, but especially I would say the legal system, because that's, to me at least, that's the most painful part. You kind of assume that politicians are going to be, they're elected officials. You don't expect much from them, but you expect a lot from a judge or from a prosecutor. And my experience over the last few years, seeing that component of our system is for sale, especially in the U.S., was shocking, and it was a huge disappointment. And I think, you and I, and hopefully other people, are going to we're going to change that together. And I think, even if I don't feel that I've been successful ultimately on a personal level. I don't know if you will be. Hopefully you will be one day. But all I can say is that, because of us, because of Darcy Flynn, because of whistleblowers before him, and hopefully whistleblowers that will come after us, eventually we're going to win.
All right. I think it's the best time to end this on a happy note. Okay. Eric, thank you very much for joining us here. We appreciate all the efforts that you made. I hope that for your next talk you'll be able to be here in person.
Thank you.